In this video, I'd like to show you how to use the Web Hierarchical Grid bound up to a viewModel class. Now, if we take a look at the grid that we've got here, we've got the Web Hierarchical Grid, and it's set up to take a look at some suppliers and the products that are associated with those suppliers. Now, in the Getting Started video, I showed you how to bind everything up using a SQL data source, but I also wanted to show you how to use the object data source that binds up against a viewModel class that was made specifically for this page. So this basically opens things up and shows you how you can use any type of data layer in order to provide data up to the Web Hierarchical Grid. Well, let me go ahead and show you how it's done. Here we are in Visual Studio 2008, and the first thing that I'd like to do is create a viewModel class. So we'll just create a new class here and call this default viewModel. And what the default viewModel will do is provide the data up to our page that it needs. So the first thing we'll do is create some properties for the suppliers and products. Now, before we do that, we need to add in a using statement to bring in our models namespace. And now we can say public iList of suppliers, and we'll just call this suppliers. And we'll do the same thing for products. Now when the page loads, we want to be able to load up all of our data, so let's create a load function. Now to save some time here, I'll paste in the code that the load function will use, and we'll just go through it real quick. So the suppliers is built up through the fake repository class, and we're basically adding 5 in, and then we're returning them all back up to this property. And then we'll create 15 products and return those back up. And then I just have a simple loop here that basically assigns supplier IDs to the products. And so this is basically mocking up relationships within our data like you would see within the database. Now this is all within the viewModel class, so it's completely abstracted away from all the stuff to the view, so it's nice that we can do testing this way. Now, we'll use the object data source in order to bind everything up to the Web Hierarchical data source. And so in order for this to work right, we do need to add a couple helper methods. And so the first thing we need to add is a get suppliers. So from here, all we're doing is simply returning our suppliers. Now, this might seem a little unnecessary because obviously we have the property up here, but the object data source is looking to call a method in order to get the data back. So we need this method available so it can get to the data that's in the property. So just a little helper method, and so we'll go and do basically the same thing for the products as well. Okay, so there's our viewModel class. It's pretty simple. From there, what we can do is go up to the view itself and start to flesh it out. So we need a couple things on the page for us here. The first thing that we'll do is add in the Web Hierarchical Data Grid. Then we'll bring on the hierarchical data source. And then we'll also need two object data sources. Bring that on, and I'll just copy that as we fill it out. So for the grid, we'll give it an ID of grid. Now what's really nice about using a viewModel class for working with these grids is that, oftentimes you can just set auto-generate bands and auto-generate columns equal to true, because hopefully what you're doing is only returning a data structure from your viewModel that's what needs to be shown on the view. So we're just going to go ahead and do that for right now. I'd like to set the width at 400 pixels. And that'll be it for now for the hierarchical grid. Now let's come down to the data sources and start filling those out. So I'm going to give this one an ID of suppliers, and this one an ID of products. So now let's build the application and switch over to design mode. Now you'll see that we have this error here for the data source, and it's just licensing stuff. This is a CTP, and I have my developer machine going, and so things get kind of crazy. So what we're looking for is the this default view model here in the demo namespace. So once we go next here, we need to choose a method for select, and I believe we were starting off with the products. So we'll choose the get products method and click finish. Now we can come back down here to the suppliers, choose the same view model class, come in here and say get suppliers and finish. And now we have the code set up for each one of our object data sources for our products and our suppliers. So at this point, what we need to do is get the hierarchical data source set up. So to begin, let's start with the data views. Now the first view here we'll call DV suppliers. The data member will be suppliers. And the data source ID is, again, for our object data source of suppliers. Let's create another view for the products. Data member will again be products. And data source ID, surprisingly, is products. Now we need some data relations. And so we'll create this relation here. The parent columns, we're looking for the ID within this item, and we'll be making the association in the child columns to the supplier ID. So the supplier ID shows up as a property within the product object, and the supplier itself has an ID property. This creates the join basically between the supplier.id and the product.supplier.id. So then the parent data view ID is DV suppliers, and the child data view ID is DV products. Now that gives us everything we need except for one thing. The object data source, what it likes to do is create its own instances of the objects. And we have one viewModel class, and we want to use one instance of that. So the best thing to do here is to customize the object data sources. Tap into the object creating event and provide for these data sources the instance of the object that we want to use. So let's drop down into the code and create a field for the viewModel. Now for viewModel classes, I like to use the page init event handler in order to get everything ready so that no matter where in the page lifecycle you are, you have it available to you. So let's create protected void page init, and then of course object sender, event args all that good stuff. Now what we want to do is create an instance of the viewModel. And then when the page loads, we can tell the viewModel to load. And now we can go over to our data sources and go to the object creating event. We'll create one for the products and also one for the suppliers. And so now we can say object instance equals our instance of the viewModel. And so the last thing that we need to do is come back to the markup and tell the grid that its data source ID is, well, we got to give this guy an ID, is DS. And now we'll say no. We've got our grid talking to the object data sources, which is talking to our viewModel, which could talk to a repository, could talk to a service, it could talk to anything it wants. It's completely abstracted away from the view.
Infragistics. On the web at infragistics.com.